Good morning. It's good to see all of you in church this morning. Thank you all so much for coming and worshiping and beginning your week. We oftentimes say this, but Sundays are the first day of the week. Sometimes we think Monday is, but actually Sunday is the first day of the week, and so you're beginning the week the right way, and that is by being in church. So we're grateful that you're here worshiping with us. We thank you for being part of the Saint on the Divine family. To those of you that are watching us live, wherever you may be, whether if you're watching us on our website or on our Saint on the Divine app, thank you for joining us as well. And if you're downloading this week's message, and if you find it beneficial, we say this almost every week, share it with your friends and your family. And to those of you that are in the church, every single week we send out our messages by email. They're on our social media stuff. If you find them beneficial, chances are they're going to benefit someone that's also in your walk of faith and in your walk of life. So make a point to go ahead and share those messages. So today we're kind of continuing this sermon series that we've been on for the last couple of weeks. It's entitled A Love That Lasts. It's a relationship sermon series that's not just about a husband and a wife, but more importantly, about a relationship that we have with God, a relationship that we have with our children, with our parents, co-workers. It's all about this. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been trying to give you some really practical ways that you can grow in your relationships, to have a love that lasts. And I gave you 2 ground rules from the very beginning, and I'm going to repeat them for you today. I want you to make sure that these ground rules are things that you follow as you're filtering the lens of this message and hearing it today. Rule number 1 is this, that what I'm talking to you about today, imagine that I'm just simply talking to you and you alone, like as if you're in my office and we're just having a conversation. Your spouse is not there, your children aren't there, your parents are not there. It's just me talking to you. So let the message speak to you first. And then number 2 is this, no matter where you are in your relationships, in any of your relationships, they can always, look at me church family, get better. They can always get better. So let's get started. Today I want to talk to you probably about one of the most difficult topics that we're going to cover in this sermon series, and that is, how do we fight right? We all have similarities in our relationships. We might like the same foods or enjoy the arts. We might like certain types of music together. There's similarities that in every relationship, in order for there to be a relationship, there's some similarities that happen. But we also have differences. The way in which we talk to people, maybe how we are as a person, our personality type, how we act in public. And oftentimes, those differences can create difficulties in a relationship. In reality, it's not a matter of if you're going to find yourself in conflict. It's really a matter of when you're going to find yourself in conflict. I heard this story a couple of weeks ago. As you know, many of you know already, we start working on our sermons several weeks in advance. There's just no time for me to work on a sermon that week that we are doing it. So we start beginning the process several weeks in advance, and they don't come easy for me, by the way. It's one thing that we spend a great deal of time writing every Sunday's sermon. And Roxanne, a couple of weeks ago, was saying that when you're preparing this particular sermon about fighting right, she said, put something funny in it. It's a heavy topic, so put something funny in it. So I found this story recently about this couple who none of you can relate to, but they were playing the silent treatment game with each other. And they weren't just talking to each other. They were in the same house together, but they were not talking to each other. They were very angry with each other. And so the husband, not wanting to give in to his wife, wrote on a Post-it note, I need you to wake me up. I've got a flight at 7 a.m. Can you wake me up at 5 a.m.? Put it on her nightstand on a Post-it note. He didn't want to talk to her or ask her that because that would mean giving in. So he simply gave it to her on a Post-it note. The following morning, the husband wakes up. Not at 5 a.m., not at 6 a.m. He wakes up at 9 a.m. He is so angry because he misses his flight, so he gets up out of bed and goes to his wife and says, honey, I told you to wake me up at 5 a.m. for my 7 a.m. flight. The wife, also not wanting to give in, simply looked and pointed towards his nightstand where she wrote on a Post-it note, wake up is at 5 a.m. She just simply wrote back to him the comment because she didn't want to give in. So the point being is this, is that I think in every one of us, if we're totally honest with ourselves, we can all deal with conflict in an unhealthy way. See if some of these ways apply to you and in your relationships. Maybe you are, number one, an avoider. This is someone much like that couple. They just kind of avoid conflict. Better yet, if you're angry with your spouse, you won't even come close to them. If you're on a couch, you're off to one end and the other spouse is off to the other end. Or if you're in bed together, you don't dare touch each other because that would seem like you would have given in. You just simply take totally away from each other. You're a avoider, or better yet, a withdrawer. Maybe number two, this does not relate to any of you especially, but number two may be that you are an escalator. An escalator is someone that likes to, communicates by yelling. Whenever they get upset, they just immediately go into that yell zone. And they think that the louder they are much more effective in that way. And study after study, church family, just hear me on this, it does not work. It does not work. You should just do the studies on your own about being a yeller or an escalator. It doesn't really work. Or maybe better yet, we're getting to some more toxic now behaviors in conflict, and that is when we can be a criticizer, where we're always looking at our spouse or a child or a parent or a friend and always being critical about them. You never do anything right. You're always doing the same thing over and over and over again. Some of you might just say amen if you're in that little field of being a criticizer. I know none of you want to admit that now, and I totally understand that. And then finally, maybe you are what we call, and this is very toxic, is a destroyer. A destroyer is someone who literally will not allow that other person or believe what that other person says. So whenever they go to defend themselves, that person, the other person, is automatically saying, no, this is what you meant. I know what you meant. This is the way you said it. This is what you believe. And no matter how much that person says, this is not how I felt, this is not what I meant, that other person doesn't believe it. They become a destroyer. Let me ask you, are you an avoider? Are you an escalator? Are you a criticizer? Or better yet, are you the destroyer? Church family, I want to give you a word of encouragement today. Is that we have to understand that God's first act to each and every one of us was an act of love. And we have to be able to recognize that because our God designed us in love, we need to always define every relationship that we're in with love. That before we go and confront, we first connect to that love. In your worship guide today, I gave you a Bible verse that I want all of you to look at. It's something that I think is oftentimes called the Mount Everest of love Bible verses. You should have got this when you came in. So if you do, open up your worship guide and see that our ushers usually are supposed to give those out. So hopefully they did. And if they do offer those to you when you come in and you're like, oh, it's okay, we use these as our sermon guide. So make sure a point that you take one of these every single Sunday. But here, listen to what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Many of you know this stuff by heart. But listen to what St. Paul, in speaking about that love. I may be able to speak in the languages of human beings and even of angels, but if I have no love, my speech is no more than a noisy gong or a clanging bell. I may have the gift of inspired preaching. I may have all the knowledge and understand all the secrets. I may, listen to this church family, I may have all the faith that's needed to move those mountains that Christ talks about. But if I have no love, I am nothing. Now filter the next several verses in your own relationships. I may give away everything I have and give up my body to be burned. But if I have no love, this does me no good. And here it goes. Love is patient. It is kind. It is not jealous or conceited or proud. Love is not ill-mannered or selfish or irritable. How are all of us doing so far? This is a great inspiring speech, Father Nick. Thanks so much. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. That's one that I think all of us can listen to again. Love is not happy with evil, but is happy with truth. Love never gives up, and its faith, its hope, and its patience never fail. Love is eternal. When you're looking and evaluating your relationship with your father or your mother, is it being patient and kind to them? Is it slow to anger? Is it keeping all the wrongs that they may have done? Or how about for your spouse? How many of us, if we're truly honest with ourselves, keep very good records of when our spouse does things that offend us or hurt us? Bringing back things that happened not just last week, but last year, a decade ago, 10 or 20 years ago. Constantly recycling those wrongdoings. No, love is kind, it is patient. My challenge for all of us is, how well of a job are we doing at that? That when we say we love that person, God gives us the definition of what that looks like. So how do we go about doing this? How do we go about following in God's steps? And more importantly, how do we fight right? Well, I think there's 3 promises that we all need to make. Here's the first promise, and I gave you in your worship guide an opportunity for you to take notes. So some of these things I think will be very beneficial, to be quite honest with you, for taking some notes. Here's number 1. I promise. Can you all say, I promise? I promise to act, not react. In other words, to act and not react. So often we wait in an argument. Once we're in that argument, we've already hurt each other, we've already been upset with each other, to then say, I'm sorry for what I said. I shouldn't have said it this way. Oftentimes, that reason is because we do not have what we call a pre-fight plan. What is a pre-fight plan? Is that you have some never statements that you say. Let me give you some and write these down. You never yell in an argument. You never yell. Believe me when I tell you this, if you are the one who yells, trust me when I tell you this, and do the research on your own. It tells, on one study, it found that us men, when our heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute, we're not even thinking. And you might even say, exactly my point, Father Nick. In those moments, when we're escalated, when we're angry and you're yelling, they're not even listening. The most optimal language to speak about is this way. Hello. This is St. John the Divine. You see how you're all listening? As opposed to that loud voice that all you're hearing is volume. Never, these are never statements, yell. Another important one for you parents. Never argue around your children. Let me tell you something. As the priest of this community for now 12 years and the youth pastor or youth minister of this church for 8 years prior, I cannot tell you how many children I see come in my office who are dealing with the scars and the wounds of parents who were yelling in public, yelling with their parents around. Don't do it. Never around your children, and I would argue too, never in public. Sometimes we feel so comfortable arguing in public. Just don't do it. Never curse. Never keep records. God doesn't keep a record for you. Don't keep a record for them. And never go to bed angry. The Bible says, never let the sun set on an argument. I promise I'm going to act, not react. Here's number 2. I promise, say it with me, I promise, you're making this promise with me now, I promise to choose humility over pride. Listen to me, everyone. The moment that you get into an argument with your spouse, your parent, your children, you are in a spiritual battle. And that is why I tell you this, totally honestly, is that the moment that you're in that battle, you have to know that you're on the devil's battlefield. And that's why in many times, you may not even remember what the argument was about, but you will remember how that argument made you feel. The words that were shared. Why? Because our ego controls us, not our humility controls us. And what I'm encouraging you all is to always go with humility. Christ had the humility of washing the feet of his disciples out of humility, knowing that they were going to betray, some of them were going to betray them or leave him when he was on the cross. How many of us in those arguments are all about me, as opposed to, no, let me give you the floor. Let me listen to what you have to say. How does that look like? Write these things down. Number one is, I will listen. Listen to this. 70% of all arguments, people aren't even listening in them. Like when they do surveys and ask the people after the argument, what was it about? They can't answer it because they weren't listening. Why? Because if you're like me, sometimes when you're in an argument with Roxanne, you're constantly doing the Google search of what she just said and trying to process what she just said without ever even listening to what she is saying in that moment. Because we're automatically thinking of our response as opposed to listening to what's being said. Just listen. Then I would say, understand. Understanding starts when you stop judging. Like when I'm in that relationship and I'm just understanding, I'm not trying to defend myself, I'm just simply understanding what they're going through. And then another one, a part of that, C part of that would be that I'm going to validate. I want to validate. I want to listen, understand, and validate. And what I mean by validate, I don't mean that you're giving in, or that you're saying that I was wrong and you were always the one that's right. That's not what we're doing. That escalates the problem. Validating means, you know what? I can see how when you heard it that way you heard it, it made you feel that way. I can see how when you made that comment, or I made that comment, or when that event happened, it created this feeling inside of you. You validate it. Most arguments are able to be resolved within minutes. The reality is that most arguments take days to resolve. And here's number 3. I promise to act, not react. I promise to choose humility over my ego, over pride. And here's number 3. I promise to forgive. I love this morning's gospel lesson. This is one of the most amazing parables. In fact, it's only mentioned one time in the Gospel of Luke that we read today. And it's read every single year as we're approaching Great Lent. It's the parable of the prodigal son. You all know it. And here this son, could you imagine, asks his father, before he's dead, give me all of my money. All the money that you've worked for, that I haven't worked for, give it all to me now. And the father says, sure, here it is. And the son goes out and takes that money that father worked morning, noon, and night for, only to have it spent on areas that we cannot say in this church. And then the son has this epiphany that I need to go back because the way I'm living, I'm feeding pigs. And if you're familiar with the Jewish parables, a Jew can never associate or even come close to pigs. So that this young Jewish son, this prodigal son, was actually hanging around and feeding off of the same food bowl that pigs feed off of. And then he goes from there and he says, what has happened to me? I've lost myself. And he goes back, I want to go see my father. I've been lost. I think now I'm found. And the father, in the most amazing parable, is sitting there and he's waiting for him. He's waiting for him. In the moment that prodigal son just simply shifts directions and goes towards his father, what does that father do? Runs to him. How many of us, if our children, or better yet, a friend, did something that betrayed us, undermined us, would be sitting there waiting for them to come back? And what does that father do? He runs to his son. And that expression in the Bible, when you hear of anyone running, it shows the extent by which he was loving his son. Because a Jewish man in a robe would never run. It was considered, to show any part of your leg was considered shameful. But it was showing you the extent of how that father did. And once the father gets to his son, he doesn't even let his son finish what he's saying. In the Greek language, it says that he begins to kiss him and kiss him all over, like showing him so much love. And if that father is telling us what the picture of what forgiveness should look like, then we as people have to learn the promise to forgive in our relationships. We've got to learn to clean the slate. The word forgiveness literally means to pardon or release someone. Can we just release a family member today? Can we just release a spouse and stop bringing up the past? Can we just release what we're doing to our children, or better yet, children to our parents? We got to do some releasing today. I leave you with this thought. When I was growing up here in Jacksonville, as you all know, I grew up was kind of formed in this community, and I loved growing up, and we had some great priests at that time, people that inspired me, but one of the people that I always loved to listen to, and maybe some of you already know this, is I used to love to listen to Billy Graham. Billy Graham was one of those people that we may have had some differences in our theology, but I loved how passionate he was whenever he spoke and whenever he talked about Christ. I remember when he came to Jacksonville and sold out the Gator Bowl. It was like the biggest thing that hit our city in a long time. And if you study his life, Billy Graham's life, who the anniversary of his death is in just a couple of days from now, him and his wife, Ruth, didn't have a picture-perfect marriage. In fact, they too had struggles in their marriage. There were challenges as a priest and a pastor's wife and how to live their life the best way. And for 63 years, they were married. And one day they were in an interview, and the interviewer, the news anchor, was asking them, what is the secret to a healthy marriage? And Ruth Graham, Billy's wife, simply put her hand on her husband's lap and said this: the secret to a healthy marriage is when two people who are in union with each other forgive each other. It is the secret of marriage is to have two great forgivers. And can I just give all of you an encouragement? Let's learn to forgive. It's not a matter of if we're going to have a conflict. I hate to tell you this, but some of you maybe on the way home today have a conflict. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So let's make some promises. I promise to act, not react. I need to create some never, never statements. I promise to choose humility over my pride. And I promise to forgive. We have to let the God who designed us in love always define every relationship we're in with His love. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.